welcome to the first episode of The Point Ever. I'm your host, Jake Huger, and we have got a great show ahead for you guys. First of all, let me tell you who sent in points this week. Former Governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm. She's also going to have a show on current television at 9 p.m. Eastern starting in January. Amanda Marcotte is a great blogger at pandagon.net, and she sent in a point where she was very disappointed with the Obama administration on a very important issue. We'll get to that in a little bit. And Russell Simmons is the co-founder of Def Jam Records, and we want to talk about one of his tweets that made big impact in the news this week. All right, now joining us on our panel, Michael Schur, the host of the legendary show 2012 on the TYT network. You can find it at youtube.com/TYT shows. God bless, welcome.
Thanks, good to be here.
Dilip Rao is the highest grossing actor ever per film. Did you follow that?
I think, yeah.
Okay, so here's a couple of movies that he started. It's not a big deal. Avatar and Inception. Not a big deal. Okay. So seriously, like more than one movie, no one has ever grossed more on average in a movie.
That's true, but I think if you just think of the two pictures, that's the reason why, and also I haven't been in that many, so I think I got lucky.
But nonetheless, it's still an awesome record. And Jimmy Dore also has many records, but I don't know them. JimmyDoreComedy.com, of course, and the Jimmy Dore Show on KPFK. You guys rock. Thanks for being on our first show. Let's get started. Our first point ever by Governor Jennifer Granholm from Michigan. Let's watch.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Granholm, and my point is that the Republican candidates who constantly say that trickle-down economics will get our economy moving again, that cutting corporate taxes or cutting the capital gains tax is going to cause businesses to come to the United States, it drives me crazy. We're in a global economy. When you cut those taxes, the investors are going to invest where they can have their returns maximized. And where is that in the global economy? But it's usually in a developing country. Over the past decade, we in this country, through multinational corporations who are based in the United States, we have lost 2.5 million jobs. Now, those companies are hiring people. They've hired about 3 million people, but they just haven't hired them in the United States. So my point is that tax policy in the United States has to be tied to job creation here. Otherwise, all you're doing is cutting taxes, giving more money to entities who may very well invest it and hire people somewhere else.
All right, Michael, interesting point by the governor. Go.
Well, first of all, the former governor of Michigan, much better looking than Jerry Brown. I'm going to say that right here.
All right, okay.
Way to go out on a limb.
It's out there now. It's out.
Than my governor. I think she makes an excellent point when you tie job creation to taxation, although to tax policy. The problem with that, of course, is mandating. You cannot mandate once you cut taxes or raise taxes what companies do with jobs. What you can mandate is you can say you're not going to get these tax breaks if you relocate workers or if you lay off here and hire elsewhere, and that's what you can do.
Well, let me challenge that because there's a bill now for tax holiday, and it's actually unfortunately bipartisan. It's John McCain and Kay Hagan from North Carolina, who's a Democrat, of course, saying, hey, if you bring back money from abroad, that'll be taxed at around 8%. I'm sorry, at around, that's right, 8%. And then, but if you create any jobs with it, then I will tax it at 5%, right? So obviously they can do it. And it's also a funny admission, because of course the corporate tax rate is supposed to be 35%, that we think most of you will not create a damn job with it.
Well, that's the problem with that, is that it doesn't say anything about creating jobs. It's just a way of seeing government revenue generated from the jobs that are going elsewhere. Right. And that is not going to help at all the existing economy in this country.
So what do you think, Dilip? Can we tie the taxation to the jobs?
I don't think it'll ever be constitutional to say you have to hire X and Y and Z and then you'll qualify and then we may lower taxes that way. I don't think that'll ever stand muster. I think the thing that the governor really mentions that's right is that what we're doing when we cut taxes in this altruistic hope they're going to start hiring, in our most decimated communities, is that somehow they're suddenly going to do something that's not in their best interest. They never do that. What we're basically doing when we cut taxes and pray they'll hire here is subsidizing outsourcing. And I think tax policy has to be tax policy for expenditures in state and in federal government resources and expenditures. It can't be this like jiggering the tax code to do every little thing, because then what happens when you do the first tax cut? The next corporation says, you know what, who else is going to leave the state? We'll leave the state if you don't give us a tax cut. And all you do is erode the entire base, which subscribes to this theory that taxes somehow are inherently evil, which they aren't. They actually inherently pay for everything we take for granted all day, and all they do is get a bad rap, of course, because no one likes to pay them personally. But if we keep doing this, we undermine everything we try to pay for, which we actually need.
Right. And Jimmy, isn't the problem overall that the whole idea is wrong, that if we lower taxes, we're going to somehow create jobs? I mean, look at Clinton era, 23 million jobs created when we increased taxes, right? Well, and then look at what happened over the last 10 years when we cut taxes. Disaster.
Well, 2 points. You know, when people say, well, if you raise taxes, it'll hurt investment. Well, so we didn't have any investment in this country in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s when the marginal tax rates were up between 50 and 90%. Of course we did. So that's bogus right there. I mean, you can blow that argument out of the water right there. The other point about, they wanted to lower the tax rate for repatriated money because that's going to help create jobs here. If we bring that money back here, actually it doesn't. It does the opposite. When you lower the tax rates on repatriated money, what that says is I can take this money, reinvest it overseas, make more money, and then bring it back for no tax. So that means is they're going to take their money and reinvest it in other countries and not here. That's why lowering the patriotizing those taxes is a bad idea.
It's totally misincentivizing the companies in corporate America, and that is a huge mistake.
And also, they're in business to be in business to make a product, to sell something, be in certain service. They're not there to maximize policy codes and find ways of jiggering the system so they can get an extra 2%, 3% here, because that's all they do. They seek out profit at the lowest level, always, right? So we can't make our tax code riddled with holes to pray they're not going to leave us.
Right.
It's just not realistic.
And you look, first of all, unfortunately, we have done that, as we all know, right? And look at what companies like GE have done. I mean, they spend so much money in their accounting department, and it pays off. They get billions of dollars back in
They are a
taxes.
perfect example of why this is a flawed philosophy.
Right. And, I thought, Jimmy, look, your point was excellent, because in 2004, we did another tax holiday. We let them repatriate the money, and two things happened. One, they cut jobs, okay? Top 10 guys, companies that got money back, and they got billions back, right, from lower taxes, actually cut tens of thousands of jobs. They didn't do what they said they were going to do at all. And at the time, they said, oh, we promise we're going to bring jobs in. But they never mandated it, so it didn't happen at all. And then second of all, immediately they took all the rest of their money and moved it offshore, waiting for the new tax holiday that's now about to come.
It's exactly what's happening. And it's another canard, just like they say, corporations need to feel confidence. They're sitting on $2 trillion, but they don't have any confidence, which is why they're not hiring. Hey, if $2 trillion doesn't give you confidence, maybe you should try dance lessons.
And another point that I think people aren't making enough here is that the Republicans, the people who want to lower the tax rates constantly and tie job creation to tax policy, are only talking, whenever they talk, they're talking about manufacturing jobs. Well, those jobs are never going to come back. That's not the approach to go into job policy with, that those jobs are never going to come back.
And also, it defies fact. They have come back. Manufacturing has led whatever meager recovery we have right now, which is showing better signs as we go along. Manufacturing has actually led that statistically.
Right, and then I love that they say both things at the same time. Oh, manufacturing jobs are never going to come back. So give me huge tax cuts so that I can recreate manufacturing jobs. Yeah. But that doesn't make any kind of sense, right? Exactly. And look, the final point on this is that no matter what you believe on whether it could be tied to jobs or not, those tax incentives, one thing's for sure, these tax cuts over the last 10 years have not created jobs. In fact, we've lost about 1 million jobs. So that idea that more tax cuts equals more jobs is just simply not true. Our next point comes from Amanda Marcotte, who is the blogger at Pentagon.net, and she is worked up about what the Obama administration has done with Plan B. Let's watch.
Thanks for having me on The Point. I want to say this to the Obama administration. Barack Obama campaigned on women's rights and restoring scientific integrity to the decision-making process at the White House. He issued a memorandum requiring all executive agencies and departments to respect the scientific process. And then his administration threw it all out by having Kathleen Sebelius overrule the FDA's decision to make emergency contraception available to all women over the counter without age restrictions. The science is in. Plan B is safe. It works by preventing ovulation and has nothing to do with abortion. The Obama administration sold out women's rights and women's health care to score a few political points. They insinuated we have some epidemic of sexually active 11-year-olds who need simply to be deprived of contraception access to act right. It's an insinuation that has no basis in fact. They need to reverse this decision immediately and allow Plan B to be sold over the counter. I'm Amanda Marcotte, and that's my point. If you want to learn more about it, check out my podcast at rhrealitycheck.org.
All right. So, Jimmy, she's understandably aggrieved by Obama's actions. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a brilliant move by Barack Obama because what he does here is he sacrifices the health of the most vulnerable in society. But what he gets out of it is he doesn't upset people who already hate his guts.
Brilliant maneuver by Obama. It's a classic. It's Obama 101.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, because, I mean, look at what Jimmy's saying. It was such a great point. Like, you think any conservative goes into the voting booth and goes, yeah, I hate that socialist son of a gun, but on the other hand, he really screwed over those teenagers that were in real trouble and denied Plan B. I'm voting for him.
Right.
It's inconceivable.
It's inconceivable.
Literally.
What's
That's good. That's good.
What they're good at is abortion pill, death panel, death tax, labeling things what they are not. And if you listen to Amanda Marcotte here, you hear her saying, this is not an abortion pill. This is not about abortion. This is about the cessation of ovulation and the prevention of ovulation. So it is not abortion, yet that's how it's being marketed, and that's why if there's any political currency to be gained here by Obama, of which we, I think, unanimously agree there's none, it would certainly not be with, it has nothing to do with the abortion or the pro-life or the pro-choice movement.
And in fact, I think the point could have been made as it was being presented. The panel was unanimous in recommending it be allowed to be sold over the counter. If he had made the point that this is simply contraception that prevents ovulation for people who, for a variety of reasons, they've said condom breaks, you forget to take a birth control pill, a variety of other forms of contraception may go wrong, and then this is a last line of defense. To have to get a prescription and all this, it's a burden that's being imposed on people who are vulnerable to pregnancy and to unwanted pregnancy. And more important, those unwanted pregnancies then end up being abortions more often than not. And this pill can prevent that from happening. Then I think this was a great argument he could have made about the necessity of giving these types of tools to the people who need them the most.
But Jimmy, isn't that the problem? Obama never makes an argument. Like, it's like, yeah, if Obama wanted to make an argument, that's a great one. It's another one is what we were saying in the beginning. How much can I get it through your thick skulls that this prevents abortions? It is not a pregnancy. And so if you allow it to be one, a lot more of these girls who are in desperate straits. Here, out of all teen pregnancies, 82% are unintended, right? So they're in a bad spot. It's going to lead to abortions, you knuckleheads. I'm trying to stop abortions.
Right.
But he can't ever make a case. He just goes, okay, what do you need? What do you need?
He actually said that, when even the FDA recommended this pill be made available, what he said was, sometimes as a parent of two daughters, he said you have to use common sense. And so, common sense, by ignoring doctor's orders and dismissing scientific studies.
Right.
That's the kind of common sense that Barack Obama, like common sense, like when a 13-year-old girl gets raped by her stepdad, so all she has to do is then convince him to take her to the doctor, admit to the doctor that he raped her, and then they get a prescription, and then she can prevent her pregnancy. That's the kind of common sense Barack Obama's talking about.
Jimmy brings something up that I think is an argument that is not being made by the people who are supporting the Sebelius decision, which is that if there is one aspect of the Plan B pill, not making it available to children, or to girls of 11 to 13, as they're saying, 11 to 14. It's the idea that this will prevent the reporting of some sexual assaults, and that, to me, is the one argument. I haven't heard that argument anywhere, by the way. It does resonate. I mean, if you can just go to the store and get a pill and you be quiet about it, you don't have to tell on that stepfather or that gym teacher or that assistant football coach.
Can I also say that this decision, it also speaks volumes about our endemic discomfort about talking about these issues of reproductive health, young people's sex drives, young people's sexual health, and their need for information. We are so afraid of talking about this because some people require us to abstain from talking about it, that even people on the side of wanting to inform our children feel sticky and strange about like talking about this in front of people. And I think we have to get to a place as a society where people who are vulnerable to these situations, young people who don't have the information or the wherewithal to argue for their best interests, they have no consequences that help them. The consequences are all negative.
Yeah.
We need to come to a place in society where we can have this discussion honestly with science and the great feeling we have about young people saying, we embrace your future. You shouldn't be a prisoner to our fears.
Yeah, the other thing we should talk about is not just the politics of it, but I'm going to take it over the top here. Look, when you try to impose and by politics, I mean the news show of did Obama do right, did he do wrong in this particular decision, but on the overall issue of, why do I care what you think about abortion? If I've got a niece or a daughter or whoever, someone I care about that's in a bad situation, right? And they need to, and whether it's being raped by their stepdad or, they made a mistake because they're kids, they made a mistake, right? And so they need to get some help. But some guy comes in and tells me, oh, no, but my sky god tells me that you're not allowed to make that decision. My sky god has made that decision for you. I mean, would we accept it if it was Thor? Like Thor has told us that you cannot get plan B. And Obama goes, well, okay,
But it's even more cynical than that, because remember when Herman Cain was still in the race? He faced this very question where he said something that totally betrayed how cynical his endorsement of the pro-life absolute 100% position was. He said, well, I think it's about families' decisions with their doctors, which is exactly what pro-choice is. You get to choose based on the circumstances that have befallen you, not on some exterior motive, which, I don't know if I have to call it a sky god, but it certainly is someone else's belief system invading your home and your decision making.
Our final point is taken from the World Wide Web. We actually loved Russell Simmons' tweet on the Lowe's controversy with the show All American Muslim. I want to show you his tweet first, and then we'll talk about it. Here's what Russell Simmons said. Just purchased the remaining spots for All American Muslim for next week. The show is now sold out. Keep your money, Lowe's, and we will keep ours. Look, Russell Simmons has been absolutely fantastic on so many different issues. I remember Zuccotti Park, he went down there the first time they were going to raid it and stood in. He said, look, if New York City needs money for cleanup or something, I will volunteer the money. In this case, if you guys haven't heard of this, Lowe's pulled their ad from the show All American Muslim on TLC. It's because a hate group, Florida Family Association, and these days, unfortunately, family means hate in any title of as they hate gay people, they hate Muslims. They put out this ridiculous propaganda that this show is going to lead to jihad. And Lowe's ridiculously pulled their ads from it. And that's why there's been so much controversy around it. And here comes Russell Simmons to the rescue, says, I'll buy the ads, right? Which I thought was a great move. What do you think, Dalip?
I think it's a great move, but just to clarify, it's actually even worse than that. It's not that the show's going to lead to jihad. It's that the show is somehow whitewashing the image of the dark Muslims of the world who really are aiming to kill us. So how dare you focus on the tiny minority you found who are all American and not make your show about the cells and cells and cells of terrorists in America today who are trying to kill us, which is a screed. This is also just on like a purely, let's say, the outrage at it for a second. Let's just look at it neutrally as a political thing for Lowe's. The minute you're going to start pulling your ads, you ought to have one review process. Who has complained? Okay?
You're right.
And what is their complaint? If their complaint is your show does not include enough examples of terrorists that equate with these good people on this show, that might be a complaint you crumple up and throw in the trash. This is not something you pull your ads over. You pull your ads over someone on that show says something so bigoted and so awful that it's incompatible with the values of the customers who come in your store. Now, the values of the people who go to Lowe's by and large are people who want to buy hardware. They're not really interested in whether you endorse or don't endorse a religion. But when you take a group of people and say, these people who are good people, I'm going to go ahead and agree with this argument. They're not representative of the evil that most of the people like them represent. You've waded way out in the weeds, and your advisors are idiots from this stupid association.
Right. And look, you have to understand, Florida Family Association gave absolutely no reasoning as to why the show...
It's indefensible.
I know. Like, they didn't even try. They weren't like, oh, and on the show they do something bad. Right. No, they're just Muslims.
They're Muslims.
Right.
No, I mean, I will defend them a little. What the people who are complaining about this, they're upset that shows like this, they create the false impression that Muslims are actually human beings. And that's dangerous. Right.
Yeah,
and then if there's more shows like this on the air, it's going to make it so much harder to round you guys up. after, when the time comes.
Well, if you leave the show on, you keep the advertising, you can go get them all at a Lowe's.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You can find them all in one place.
So, but look, let's keep it real again. Michael, if they took out the word, Florida Family Association took out the word Muslim and put in the word Jew in the same sentences and said, this shows Jews in a good light when obviously Jews have a Jewish agenda, all the same exact words they use.
Mel Gibson would donate.
Right, Mel Gibson buys out the rest of the spots.
Exactly. And that's the best point. And what Simmons has done is he's called out everybody, the NAACP, the Congress on Racial Equality, the Anti-Defamation League. And he said, listen, if this were the case, he's not even saying what you just asked. He's not saying if this were the case and it was Jewish, imagine the uproar, which of course is a valid point. And there are reasons why the uproar would be larger because the infrastructure already exists there in a very well-financed way in America. But what he is saying, he's saying these are your brothers. These are people just like you. This is another group similar to you. You should be doing more. It's not the what if it were you. This is a call to arms. It is you. It is you.
You don't think it's misleading for the show to they show Muslims getting on airplanes and then the planes landing safely?
But listen, it's a great point that Michael's making because, Peter King was having the hearings in Congress about how dangerous are Muslims. And this is part of the phenomenon. And they fearmonger, et cetera. Now, there's more right-wing terrorist attacks inside the United States than there are Muslim terrorist attacks inside the United States. Shockingly, he's not doing a hearing about that. Right. He's also not doing a hearing about the IRA, which he used to raise money for, which is also a terrorist organization. But if I was to go to Peter King's hearings, and I was Muslim, I'm agnostic now, right? But I would say, hey, listen, I am 100% American. You don't get to question me. You don't get to say, hey, how American are you? I'm just as American as anybody else. I would argue Peter King and the Florida Family Association are less American than us because they fundamentally miss the point of America, which is that we're all citizens here that are absolutely equal.
See, it's hard not to play their game, right? They're not American.
Well, I'll go right back at them. People say, hey, you shouldn't do that. No, they are. They're un-American.
I think the most offensive part of this whole thing is the swiftness of their reaction and how fast they pull their ads without even bothering to process what these people were saying and what they were suggesting. What they really are suggesting is that this show needs to be leavened with another half hour that just focuses on the terrorists that live in your neighborhoods. It is the most preposterous suggestion for a activist group to make towards a network. If you talk about entertainment, right? Most of the time a boycott starts, it's because something has been aired that is so grandiosely offensive to the people who are going to watch that network. We're talking about people who are going around in minivans picking up their kids. How is this in any way what's offending America today?
This is enriching America. I mean, this is an opportunity. That's one of the sort of the great things about cable television is there's so much on that you can see the sort of the normalcy of a family doing that.
That's so true. But the first time that I saw the ads, before there was any controversy or anything, I saw the ads for the show and I thought, this is going to be the most boring show ever. Oh, look, hey, look at that Muslim. He went to go pick up a sandwich. Whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
On the other hand, look at the rest of television, right? All the reality shows. I once saw one where it was on Indiana teenagers. I was like... Yeah.
Can we just say something? This language of Muslims and Islamophobia, it's coded language. Because we're not talking about Muhammad Ali. Okay, they're not talking about I'm really afraid of a Farrakhan coming and blowing up my house. It's Arab. It's you're Arab, you're Muslim, you're in this hybrid of people I don't know because maybe I don't live in Michigan where there's a lot of Arabs around me. You dress that way. You do something and identify yourself differently.
Although that is kind of funny how they dress.
Look, aesthetically, you can say whatever you want. Yeah, sure. Lots of people dress lots of ways.
They should go to Lowe's and buy a mirror.
What about the guys whose pants are falling down? They dress that way. That's as offensive as anything to me.
It's much more offensive because I have no interest in their boxers. One last thing about this. I should say one last point about this that has to be worked in. American Muslims spend $33 billion a year on housing and housing services, which I'm blown away by.
That's amazing.
Didn't mean blown away, but but that's a tremendous amount of money. That compared to a rinky-dink Florida organization, which by the way is a bunch of liars because they claim 65 out of the 67 sponsors dropped out. We actually did research on the Young Turks on Current. It's not true at all. We called McDonald's seriously we didn't pull out. What the hell are they talking about, right? So that tiny group versus $33 billion in shopping and housing area, it's such a bad business decision.
You're also tearing at the fiber of America. You're saying these people actually, you're really great people, but you're not representative of your people. We need to find someone not like you, someone who's a horror,
Yeah, that's the worst part of it. So we'll leave it on that point. And you know what? I actually want to do one more thing. I want to tweet out to Russell Simmons. We wrote this ahead of time. Because I just think that it was such a great thing to do on his part that we should return it. So we're tweeting back at him. Watch this. I'm sending.
Wow.
Send.
Wow, technology.
Okay. Russell Simmons, you've been tweeted by The Point. Okay. So now I have one final point, and it's about the Defense Authorization Act that is going through Congress this week. And it is just abhorrent. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but what it does is it allows the military to act inside the United States of America. Before, of course, FBI, local police would take police action. Now the military can. And they can detain just about anybody, including United States citizens, and they could hold them indefinitely. It is a clear violation of the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment. Posse comitatus is out the door. That's been around since the Civil War. Now the military can act inside the United States if this thing passes. For a brief period of time, we thought that President Obama might veto it, and we thought he might veto it because he thought the civil liberties abuses were too much in the bill. It turns out that he will not be vetoing it, and in fact, he had been arguing all along, if you believe Senator Carl Levin, who I do believe, said that no, President Obama wanted to expand the rights of the executive branch and wanted to make sure that he could also detain U.S. citizens without a trial. It is hideous. It's hideous on the part of the Republicans who pushed for it, the Democrats who agreed to it, President Obama, who apparently wanted to expand the powers that take away from our constitutional rights. It just isn't right, and nothing is more, unfortunately, un-American than that, because this country is supposed to stand for the rights of everyone to get a fair trial. I mean, this is the basis of Western democracy, habeas corpus. If you are arrested, they need to bring you and give you a fair hearing, and they're taking that away from U.S. citizens, and it's unacceptable. So that's my final point for the week. And I want to thank everybody who's been here. Mike LaSure, of course, you can catch him on 2012 on the TYT network. Dileep Rao, a great actor, Avatar, Inception. Jimmy Dore, of course, on the Jimmy Dore Show at KPFK. You guys have been great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on The Point.